The historical text before you today presents a rigorous analysis of British imperial policy toward the Kemalist movement during the Turkish War of Independence.
Right.
And the mission of this deep dive is to systematically unpack the diplomatic, military, and psychological strategies employed by the British Empire, alongside the Istanbul government, to dismantle the nationalist resistance in Anatolia.
Precisely. The overarching thesis of the provided text establishes a highly specific historical paradigm. Rather than analyzing the Anatolian movement as a legitimate national struggle representing popular sovereignty, British authorities, operating in direct conjunction with their local collaborators, systematically engineered a framework to define it as an illegitimate rebellion.
I see.
To accomplish this structural delegitimization, they deployed a multifaceted approach. This strategy encompassed the weaponization of religious decrees, the calculated exploitation of ethnic and sectarian divisions, and a series of covert military operations, all of which were designed to neutralize the resistance before it could consolidate territorial control.
Let us examine the foundational layer of this strategy, which focuses on the etymology and the nomenclature. The text explicitly notes that the British initially viewed the Anatolian movement with, well, complete negativity.
Indeed.
The specific term Kemalist was not merely a descriptor. It was purposefully coined by the British as a pejorative identifier. And the source draws a direct academic parallel here, comparing it to how the term Washingtonist was utilized by the British during the American Revolution.
Right. The naming of a movement after an individual is a deliberate academic and political mechanism of reduction. By utilizing the term Kemalism, an imperial power attempts to delegitimize a widespread uprising, essentially reducing profound structural and national grievances to the personal ambitions of a single individual.
Which brings us to Professor Toynbee's analysis in the text.
Yes. Professor Toynbee observed that the term Kemalist, much like Washingtonist, was meant to evoke the specific idea of a military adventurer, the implication being that such an adventurer uses terror, flattery, and deception to establish a fake movement with just a few loyal henchmen. And interestingly, Toynbee also noted that Mustafa Kemal himself explicitly stated he was not a Kemalist.
The public diplomatic stance maintained by the British leadership mirrored this linguistic dismissal precisely, didn't it?
It did. Prime Minister Lloyd George dismissed Mustafa Kemal as merely a, quote, rebel general. The official position dictated that a rebel general could not be an interlocutor for His Majesty's government.
So their initial strategic response was entirely administrative. It involved applying diplomatic pressure on the Istanbul government, specifically Sultan Vahdettin and the Grand Vizier, to officially recall Mustafa Kemal in July 1919.
Correct. And this was a previously successful tactic. The source notes that the British had already sidelined other prominent Ottoman military figures in a similar manner.
Right. The text specifically identifies Ali Aksan, Yakub Shevki, and Cemal Pashas.
Exactly. But Mustafa Kemal formally refused the recall order. More significantly, he resigned his military commission entirely to return to the bosom of the nation, a concept captured in the phrase Sinai Millet.
By stripping away his official rank, he fundamentally altered his political status. Concurrently, the British administrative strategy was supported by active intelligence operations on the ground.
Yes, the British were not relying solely on the Sultan's authority. The text details that British intelligence, including Colonel Frew, operated extensively in the Aegean region. Their specific objective was to isolate local resistance from the broader Kemalist action.
Simultaneously, General Mild applied direct pressure on the Interior Minister, Adil, to eliminate Mustafa Kemal through what became known as the Ali Galip plot.
Which brings us to a critical analytical point.
Please, go ahead.
High Commissioner Admiral Calthorpe demanded that the Bab Yali formally declare Mustafa Kemal an outlaw across the eastern provinces.
Okay, let's unpack this. If they merely saw him as a rebel general, why did they invest so much diplomatic capital in having him officially declared an outlaw by the Sultan rather than just handling it militarily?
Well, securing that legal decree established a crucial domestic legal framework. It effectively shifted the logistical and moral burden of military enforcement onto local Ottoman actors and proxy forces, rather than requiring an overt deployment of British forces deep into the Anatolian interior.
Which leads directly into the mechanics of the Malatya plot. Grand Vizier Damat Ferit officially dismissed the Anatolian movement to the British, calling it a straw fire whose flames have died.
Yes, that specific metaphor was used.
Yet, while dismissing it publicly, Damat Ferit was actively attempting to eliminate Mustafa Kemal covertly. utilizing retired adventurer Colonel Ali Gallup.
And crucially, this operation included the direct participation of a British intelligence operative, Major E.W.C. Knoll.
Right, and the perception of Major Knoll within the British diplomatic corps is highly revealing. The text cites the British diplomat Haller, who expressed a documented fear that Knoll would turn out to be a, quote, Kurdish Colonel Lawrence.
Which implies a specific operational model infiltrating indigenous populations and mobilizing them into an armed insurgency. The text details that Major Knoll was officially sent to Malatya to study Kurdish tribes.
However, Knoll, along with the Badirian brothers, specifically Saladin and Kamaran, held a clandestine meeting with Ali Gallup.
But the operation failed. Mustafa Kemal's intelligence network discovered the plot. He ordered the immediate arrest of both Ali Gallup and Major Nawal. The gathered Kurdish forces were dispersed, and Nawal was physically escorted to the border.
What requires deep analysis here is the ensuing diplomatic fallout. British Chief Dragoman Ryan issued an official assertion that the meeting between Knoll and Gallup was an unfortunate coincidence.
Right, a standard diplomatic denial.
But the text cites Lord Kinross, who noted the plot was highly probable. Furthermore, Major Noel undermined his own embassy's denial.
Yes, the communications failure. Following his expulsion, Major Knoll transmitted a telegram to Istanbul complaining of his mistreatment. Crucially, he sent this telegram unencrypted,
Supplying Mustafa Kemal with concrete documentary evidence of British and Damat Ferret's collusion. It's essentially modern covert operations where the diplomatic left hand officially denies the actions of the intelligence right hand, but the paper trail remains.
Exactly. Moving into the fall of 1919, after Mustafa Kemal utilized this evidence to force the collapse of Damat Ferret's government, the British did not immediately crush the nationalists.
They shifted their strategy.
They did. They allowed a more sympathetic government to form, even accepting Mersinli Simal Pasha as Minister of War. The objective was to soften and absorb the nationalist movement via the newly convened parliament in Istanbul.
And the text indicates this strategy almost worked. Even prominent figures like Karabekir Pasha considered the possibility of dissolving the representative committee, the Hayat Temsili.
However, the underlying geopolitical reality of this arrangement was articulated by Lloyd George on February 26, 1920. He explicitly explained why the Sultan was kept in Istanbul.
Right. If the Sultan and his ministers were in Konya, far from Allied garrisons, Lloyd George stated he would feel less comfortable.
Precisely. In Istanbul, the government was physically under the guns of British dreadnoughts. It is a classic imperial strategy, controlling the traditional center of power to project authority over the periphery.
Here is where it gets really interesting regarding the structural dynamics. Mustafa Kemal recognized this geopolitical trap. He utilized the closeness with Istanbul to strengthen his military control in Anatolia, actively pushing forces under Ali Fuat Pasha toward Izmit.
And by March 1920, those nationalist forces had reached Debsi,
which directly threatened the British hold on the Bosphorus.
Correct. Consequently, Lord Curzon and Lloyd George decided to act. Lloyd George noted that a Turkish governor, mistakenly thinking Mustafa Kemal was merely the governor of Erzurum, could not attack French allies in Marash without consequence.
This provided the pretext for the events of March 16, 1920, the official occupation of Istanbul. Unarmed soldiers were killed at Şehzadebasha, Parliament was raided, and MPs were arrested.
Furthermore, General Shuttleworth was placed directly in the Ministry of War.
The diplomatic pressure was immense. Between February 17th and March 31st, 5 separate notes were given to the Ali Raza government, demanding nationalist forces pull back 3 kilometers in the Aegean.
This pressure achieved institutional collapse. Al-Riza resigned on March 3, Salih Pasha resigned on April 2, and Damat Ferret was brought back on April 5 as Grand Vizier.
Which leads to the weaponization of religion. On April 11, under British pressure, Sheikhul Islam Durzad issued a fetwa. The text details that this fetwa was physically distributed via British planes and ships.
The decree declared the nationalists as Iskia bandits. It made it a religious duty, a farce, to kill them. Those who died fighting nationalists would be martyrs, those who killed them, Ghazis.
The juxtaposition here is striking. You have ancient religious edicts being distributed by modern British aircraft and dreadnoughts.
It is the systematic utilization of spiritual authority, specifically the caliphate, to execute a secular imperial policy.
In response, Mustafa Kemal ordered the Ankara Mufti Rafat to issue a counter-fetwa, stating the caliph was a captive of enemies and fighting for liberation was the true religious duty.
And Mustafa Kemal expanded this ideologically. On March 17, 1920, he issued a pan-Islamist manifesto.
Appealing directly to Muslims in Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and India, framing the British attack as a crusade against the last bastion of Islamic independence.
This deeply frightened the British administration. The text references Chief Dragman Ryan's December 1919 memo, which warned that both Bolshevism and Pan-Islamism could destroy British rule.
Ryan's proposed solution was highly pragmatic: divide, act like a friend, and then rule.
We see this applied across sectarian lines. British diplomat Stokes formally suggested exacerbating the Sunni-Shia divide.
Ethnic divisions were also aggressively exploited. Lord Curzon proposed an Armenian state that included Erzincan and even conceptualized a Lazistan mandate.
Though the text notes the Lazistan mandate failed entirely because no such movement existed on the ground.
The British also actively encouraged Kurdish nationalism. Curzon envisioned a united Kurdistan as a strategic buffer against both Bolshevism and Turkey.
And de Montferrat offered to use Kurds against Mustafa Kemal in April and July of 1920. However, Ryan noted in September 1920 that the Kurds were reluctant to align with the British.
So what does this all mean for the effectiveness of the British strategy? They are trying to weave together Kurdish independence with Armenian territorial claims. How do they expect those two diametrically opposed promises to hold together?
They couldn't hold together seamlessly. The Kurds feared the region would ultimately be handed over to an Armenian mandate. It reveals how imperialism approaches identity politics, not as a matter of human rights, but as modular tools to construct buffer states.
Despite this contradiction, they found high-level collaborators. Sayyid Abdulkadir of the Kurtali Semiyeti collaborated heavily with the British and de Montferrat.
Yes, releasing statements calling the national forces homeless vagabonds with Bolshevik minds.
The text notes that Savat Tursunolu and Suleiman Natsiv had previously tried to win Abdulkadir over, but were told the Allied powers were already supporting the Kurds.
Abdulkadir's reference to Bolshevik minds ties directly into the massive information war launched by the British and the Istanbul government.
The propaganda campaign accusing the nationalists of Bolshevism.
Precisely. The text notes Captain Sully, a British officer, obtained a fetwa from Mustafa Sabri Effendi explicitly declaring the Muslim religion against Bolshevism.
Mustafa Kemal noted the profound irony of this on February 26, 1920. The Caliph had declared a jihad against Britain in 1914, but by 1920, the British were using that same Caliph to issue death warrants against Turkish nationalists.
The press campaign executing this narrative was extensive. The source lists of numerous headlines. Ali Kemal in Payam de Sabah wrote, "Execution, execution, execution. Mustafa Kemal will find his punishment."
He also referred to Mustafa Kemal's buffooneries, and the publication Alamdar called the Ankara Counterfatwa a décalé, a term pertaining to the Antichrist.
Other papers actively participating included Ferda, Turkse Istanbul, Renin, and Asaksos, which warned of the Red Danger.
The incredible persistence of this press campaign is notable. We track the narrative shift from dismissing a childish dream in 1919 to generating panic about an Ankara-Moscow alliance in 1921.
It was dual-layered, using Bolshevism to secure Western Allied support, and using anti-religious banditry to alienate the local conservative population.
And it continued until the very end. Ali Kemal's final article, Our Aims Were and Are One, was published on September 10, 1922. That is exactly one day after Izmir was liberated.
But this propaganda was also meant to trigger kinetic counter-revolutions. The British aimed to create two physical buffer zones to protect the straits, Biga and Gonin for the Dardanelles and Dus and Hendek for the Bosphorus.
Ahmet Enzavur launched a rebellion in the Biga and Gonin region. He was heavily funded by British gold.
The text specifies 5,000 coins brought from a British torpedo boat via Senekale.
Enzavur was made a pasha on April 11th, and he called his forces Kuvaya Mohammadiye, though he was eventually defeated by Shirkez Edom.
Following this, on April 18, 1920, the Kuvaya Insabashi, the Caliphate Army, was officially formed under Suleiman Shafik and Sufi Pashas.
With British permission and funding. Privates were paid 30 liras, colonels 150 liras.
This culminated in the Battle of Izmit in June 1920. Ali Fuat Pasha attacked the Caliphate Army, which was entrenched with British forces.
The Caliphate troops largely surrendered. The British then fired artillery, and a British officer under a white flag demanded a ceasefire, threatening war.
And when the nationalists pushed further, British planes bombed them.
Okay, let's unpack this operational shift. The British essentially tried to build a firewall out of local insurgencies to protect the Bosphorus. When that firewall burned down, they had to call in a foreign military.
Exactly. Realizing the Caliphate army had failed, the British called in the Greek army on June 22 to occupy Bandurma, Bursa, and Izmit.
Which brings us to Chief Dragoman Ryan's September 1920 report, outlining ways to defeat the nationalists and enforce the Treaty of Sèvres.
Ryan outlined 3 options. First, direct Allied military action, which he deemed impossible due to a lack of money and troops.
Second, using the Greeks, which was risky because they demanded massive territorial rewards, like a Pontus Republic or more of Izmir.
And third, using voluntary Turkish elements, meaning fostering further internal rebellion. The British opted to continue fueling this internal discord.
For example, rumors of the Caliphate army reaching Samsun triggered the Yelcizeli and Zile Alevi uprisings.
Mustafa Kemal ordered the Alevi-Dede Çelebi Efendi, a Bektashi sheikh and MP in Mukur, to calm the region.
But the text notes a specific detail. Çelebi Efendi claimed illness and avoided involvement. It highlights how local leaders had to navigate the immense pressure between the Ankara government and the expanding internal conflicts.
Ultimately, the rebellion spread to Yozgat and was suppressed by Shirkazadam.
The strategy of expanding rebellions continued into 1921. In March, Seyit Abdülkadir's network triggered the Koskiri Rebellion, led by Haydar and Alisher,
which demanded a Kurdish province and lasted until June 1921. Ryan's memo reveals the cold, bureaucratic nature of imperial policy. The fate of entire populations was debated merely as cost-benefit options for enforcing the Treaty of Sèvres.
This bureaucratic management extended to the Mosul theater, driven by oil and air power. The British sought to use Kurds as a buffer to protect Iraqi oil fields.
In spring 1922, Ankara sent militia Lieutenant Colonel Özdemir Bey to the Revendes region to prevent King Faisal's British-backed occupation.
His directive was to expose British intentions to divide Islamic unity and highlight the British alignment of Nemrut Mustafa's association in Suleimani.
Despite British aerial bombardments, Özdemir Bey won the Battle of Derbent on August 30, 1922, one day after the Great Victory in Anatolia, and captured Shatlava.
In a panic, the British declared the independence of Suleimani under a British mandate and made Sheikh Mahmud king of Kurdistan.
However, Sheikh Mahmud told Özdemir Bey's representative, Captain Faizi, that the British just wanted to divide Turks and Kurds and offered to march on Suleimanian together.
But Ankara did not permit this joint operation due to the restrictions of the Mudanya Armistice.
Consequently, the British brutally bombed unarmed villages through the winter of 1922-1923, taking the region with overwhelming force in April 1923.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, how does the use of aerial bombardment against unarmed villages in Revendes align with the British claim of establishing mandates for the protection of local peoples?
It directly contradicts it. The military tactics in Revendes were driven by the broader economic imperatives of the British Empire, specifically securing Mosul oil, which predetermined their policy at the Lausanne Conference.
Ekrem Baydar, Mustafa Kemal's Istanbul police chief, corroborated this. He noted the British later supported the 1925 Shi'ite rebellion under a Sharia guise, specifically to secure Mosul's oil.
Moving to the final maneuvers, the text details a Circassian Congress in Izmir on October 24, 1921, which sought British protection, as noted in Rumbold's Lamb report.
By summer 1922, there was a push for an Ionian autonomy, a state for Christians, Circassians, and anti-Kemalists.
When this failed, Lord Curzon used Lausanne to heavily pressure Turkey to grant amnesty to all Muslim collaborators, arguing that punishing them would cause fear and instability.
Turkey wanted the right to punish collaborators, but ultimately, Curzon succeeded, securing amnesty for most.
However, the text explicitly provides a vital caveat. These British efforts should not overshadow the fact that the vast majority of Circassians and Kurds fought heroically for Turkey's independence.
The source specifically names Lieutenant Colonel Mahmut, Colonel Bekir Sami, Rolfor Bey, and the Eastern tribes.
Finally, when all structural and military efforts failed, the British resorted to assassination.
Mustafa Sajer, an Indian-British spy, arrived in Ankara posing as a representative of Indian Muslims. He offered Mustafa Kemal 1 million British pounds and a villa in Italy.
It was presented as a fallback plan to reduce his resolve.
I mean, trying to buy off the leader of a national resistance with a villa in Italy under the guise of pan-Islamic solidarity is a remarkably audacious plot.
But Sajer's invisible ink letters were discovered. Despite official pleas from Curzon and the Aga Khan, he was hanged on May 24, 1921.
Historian David Walder compared Lloyd George's obsession with destroying Mustafa Kemal in 1922 to Anthony Eden's obsession with Nasser in 1956.
Which perfectly illustrates the ultimate pragmatic failure of the British strategy. Despite leveraging religion, ethnicity, massive funding, military occupation, and assassination, the resistance held.
This deep dive reveals a comprehensive blueprint of imperial intervention, showing exactly how external powers map and manipulate the internal sociological fault lines: religion, ethnicity, political rivalries of a target nation.
The survival of the Kemalist movement was not just a military victory. It was a triumph over a sophisticated, multi-layered apparatus of geopolitical, psychological, and sectarian warfare.
It leaves you with a critical question to consider as you observe modern geopolitical conflicts. When we see deep internal divisions being broadcast as organic domestic issues today, to what extent are we actually watching the invisible architecture of foreign policy objective playing out in real time?